wildfires are increasing in intensity and frequency at a global scale. Maybe a lot of mornings when you wake up in the morning, you listen to the news and you heard of wildfires happening like Amazon, Australia, California. Yes, even in the United States, the area burned have been increased to double since 1991. Sorry. Hello. So, as you know, mercury is a persistent and toxic metal. You've known that mercury is a pollutant. Maybe when you consider pollutant, you say, okay, it's from human activities. Yes, human activities contribute a lot to the mercury emissions, such as coal-fired power plants. However, the very pretty forest is a large sink for mercury because forests can receive mercury from dry deposition and the wet deposition. So the dry deposition is the stomatal uptake by leaves in the canopy part from the atmosphere, and the wet deposition is wet, is by precipitation. So this makes forests as a very significant sink in the vegetation and in the land. So when there is forest fires, it will release mercury from the vegetation and land into the atmosphere. At the same time, it will disturb the mercury storage and the forest floor, thus affect the mercury transport to the downstream. So previous studies have largely focused on mercury emissions. However, the leftover mercury on the forest floor and post-fire mercury transport is poorly understood. So after the large emissions of mercury from the forest, I'm wondering, would there be any mercury left behind on the forest floor? So you see this picture, this is a wildfire site from a previous paper. You've seen the black and white stuff here. They are the burning residues. They are called ash. So as you see, after the wildfire, the forest floor has been demonstrated to be a two-layer system. The top layer as ash covered on the soil layer. So the ash layer have been demonstrated to play an important role in the runoff, in the hydrology, but in the mercury biogeochemical cycling part, it's very poorly understood. Previous burning studies showed that the burning would release most of the carbon and the mercury from the vegetation. As you see that more than 90% of the carbon, the mercury have been released from the original different vegetations. This leads to very low mercury content in the burned biomass. Then I'm wondering, would there be similarly low mercury in the wildfire ash, because ash has been sitting there for a long time. Therefore, so where we can find, if we want to answer this question, we need to find ash. So where we can find ash easily in the United States? Yes, California. Yeah, it has a lot of fires every year. So in the summer of 2015, there are two wildfires, Rocky Fire and Red Fire, happened in California, Northern California. It's very close to UC Davis. So our collaborator, Dr. Randy at UC Davis, was able to collect different types of samples, including unburned litter, black ash, and white ash in different locations at the two wildfire sites. So the black unburned litter is the litter unburned, of course, and the black ash is generated due to incomplete combustion, and white ash is generated by complete combustion. So we characterized the organic matter into in the different types of samples, and we found that the organic matter decreased with black ash and white ash when the burn severity increased. This makes sense because with the burning, the biomass will, the carbon will release. These results will also further verified that our classification of the ash group is appropriate. So we use here. We also use another indicator, calcium, to do indicate the burn severity, especially when the sample mass is very low. Calcium and analysis is very efficient. So why we use calcium? Because calcium is relatively stable in the samples. The boiling point is 1484 Celsius. Usually the wildfire cannot reach this high temperature. So not surprisingly, with burn severity, in the black ash and white ash, with the higher burn severity, the higher calcium content in the sample. And then we analyzed the mercury content in the 3 different types of samples. We found the mercury content in the unburned liter ranges from 10 to 65 nanogram per gram. So this is a very normal range. It's in coordinates with the previous study. So remember the previous experimental ash, it contains very low mercury. However, in our wildfire ash, they contain the comparable mercury with the unburned liter. This made me thinking, why? So where is the mercury come from? Is that from the air, from the vegetation? So we used mercury stable isotopes to identify where it is. So MIF relate to the sunlight, and MDIF relate to the release of the higher and heavier and lighter isotopes. So here is our ash samples. And the green and the yellow are the liter samples, and the cross are air samples. So not surprisingly that we found that the ash samples contained higher, heavier mercury isotopes. And in summary, that after we compare, after we plot all the data together, after we observed the higher, heavier mercury isotopes than unburned liter in ash, and we compared with the air, and we found that air is much higher than the isotope in the ash samples. This indicates that mercury in the ash is very likely derived from the liter, not from the air. So, since there are so large proportion of so large amount of mercury in the ash, still, I'm wondering, will the form and reactivity of mercury be altered? Why they cannot be released by the wildfire, since wildfire has been so high temperature? Maybe to you, all of the mercury are very bad. It's pollutants, it's toxic. However, actually, there are some good mercury and bad mercury. The good mercury, the bad mercury are, we say, scientifically, we say reactive mercury, such as mercury chloride, mercury zero, mercury selenium, mercury humate, and so on. This kind of mercury can be transformed into the very toxic methyl mercury, which can be bioaccumulate in the food web and finally go into our human. And the good mercury, scientifically we say non-reactive mercury, such as mercury sulfide, mercury oxide, and so on. This kind of mercury cannot be transformed to methyl mercury. So they are very stable and they are safe. So I didn't target on the specific mercury speciations here, but I'm curious. I was curious what's the reactivity of the mercury. So I used nitric acid to release the reactive mercury. It is a very commonly used method in previous study that can release most of the mercury in the samples. However, although nitric acid is strong, it is not strong enough to release the non-reactive mercury. So we used another method, Peijia, which is a very strong acid to release all the forms of mercury in the samples. So how strong it is? So maybe you have known, it can dissolve gold. It's so strong. So we have to be very careful when I did this experiment. But anyway, I extracted the mercury content from Aquaregia by the method of Aquaregia and then by the nitric acid, and this is non-reactive mercury. And so as a lot of the natural samples, in the unburned litter, we did not find a lot of non-reactive mercury. However, the ash contained very high proportion of non-reactive mercury. So why? So as you know, organic matter is very important binding site for mercury. So I used a method that is widely used in organic matter characterization field, pyrolysis GCMS, to analyze the molecular carbon compositions in our samples. So I analyzed 90 to 125 compounds in each sample and then classified them into non-groups. I explored all the non-group, the relationships between the group, between the different categories of the organic matter and the reactive mercury. And I found that this aromatic hydrocarbon and polyaromatic hydrocarbon, which we call black carbon, have some relationship with the mercury reactivity. So this is the structure of the black carbon. Basically, they contain a lot of aromatic structures. Also, previous study also shown that in the temperature range that generating ash, at the same time, black carbon will be generated. So then I look at the relationship between the black carbon and the non-reactive mercury. And very excitingly, I found that there is a strong correlation between the black carbon and non-reactive mercury. This is the first study demonstrates there is a relationship between the black carbon and mercury reactivity. Although I did not find the relationship in the white ash. So I concluded that non-reactive mercury in black ash is very likely to be controlled by the black carbon, although in the white ash there could be some other inorganic compounds controlling non-reactive mercury in white ash. So far, we know that in the dry summer in California, the wildfire released the mercury to the air. There's still a lot of mercury left behind, and the changed mercury to less reactive mercury. Then how is the downstream? I'm very curious what happens to mercury if ash is mobilized to water. Why are we concerned about downstream? Because in the downstream environment, there are bacteria that can transform the mercury to the toxic methylmercury. So first, I did an experiment to test if the ash can absorb mercury from the surrounding water. So I did a very simple experiment. I added ash into our mercury 2 spike. And I used active carbon as a control. Activated carbon, as you know, if you may have known that it shows a very strong sorption capability. So now, surprisingly, activated carbon removed almost 100% of the mercury. And very surprisingly, the black ash and the white ash, both of them removed more than 90% of the mercury from the solution. That means the remaining water after you add ash contains very low mercury. This is kind of beneficial when the ash goes into the water because it will absorb mercury into the ash. But in the environment, usually we concern the bacteria for the mercury methylation. So we did another experiment, the incubation experiment, for the anoxic, to simulate the anoxic condition. So I added ash and the stream water together, and then I closed the cap, sealed with paraffin to produce an anoxic environment, and then put the hundreds of bottles into the dark room. And then after 4 weeks, I opened the cap and analyzed the solution. So when I opened the cap, the litter and the black ash smelled very bad. It was hydrogen sulfide. You know how it is smell. But the white ash bottles, actually, there was a lot of hydrogen sulfide smell. So, but anyway, so we found, after I analyzed the different samples, the mercury levels in the different samples, I found that both black ash and white ash contain much lower mercury than the amber leaf. Maybe it's not easy for you to see the amber leaf is here. Okay, so you see they contain much lower mercury levels than burned liter. And very interestingly, when I plot the black carbon and the mercury released from the solution, I found a strong relationship. The more black carbon, it will lead to the less mercury release. This is consistent with the previous plot. It's a stronger binding. And the more concerned methylmercury. So the methylmercury, we still observed lower methylmercury production from the white ash and black ash. So that means when ash goes into the water, the ash mercury will less likely be methylated to methylmercury. Could be because of the lower release of mercury from the ash. Okay, so this is the ash plus the water. When you go to the environment, there's another very important medium, sediment. So I did another experiment. I added ash, sediment, and water together with similar settings, put them into the dark. And then after a couple weeks, I analyzed the mercury and methylmercury in the water. And I found that both black ash and white ash released lower mercury than the control. So the control is just the sediment of water with no ash, with nothing. And the methylmercury, surprisingly, it's also reduced, contain the reduced methylmercury than the control. So that means the ash, when the ash goes into the water, it could potentially reduce the mercury methylation levels in an anoxic environment. So in summary, this study showed that ash contained a comparable amount of mercury with unburned liter. Non-reactive mercury in ash was much higher than unburned liter, which was very likely to be controlled by black carbon. Ash showed high sorption properties towards aqueous mercury too, and in the lab simulated anoxic aquatic environment, ash mercury exhibited low capability to be released into the water and low methylation potentials. So we did, when the ash goes into the water, we did the simulated modeling system in the lab. So what happens to mercury in the aquatic environment in the real life after the wildfire? So just a conceptual model. After the wildfire, as you understood, the wildfire will affect the mercury storage, reactivity, and mobility of mercury on the land. And when there is precipitation, it will affect the mercury transport and mercury transformations to the downstream, and will further affect the mercury uptake by biota through the food web. And finally, it will go to our human, cause our health concern. So here, I will just focus on the first essential step, how much mercury transported to the mercury, because this is the kind of the door of the mercury levels in the water environment. So my question is, how do wildfires affect the mercury transport in the burned watershed in the field setting? Our collaborator collected the samples from the same fire. Catch Creek affected by the Rocky Fire, the Cold Creek affected by Red Fire, and a nearby reference stream. We collected the samples for 2 years, but due to the limited time, I will just show the typical one, compare the reference stream and the small, almost completely burned watershed, Cold Creek, or later on, I'll just say Red Fire watershed. So how does that look like? So this is the burned watershed actually. Before, in California, there is a long summer, right? And after the long summer, in the winter, the precipitation will come. So before the precipitation, the burned watershed is like this. The natural water is very natural. And after the first storm, and this is the water goes into the stream. It's very clear. This is very turbid. So this is how it looked like for when the storm comes in the burned watershed. So we first analyzed the total suspended solid in the reference site and the burned site. So the total suspended solid represent for how turbid it is. So this is the picture from the reference site. You can see it is very clear. It contains the very low TSS. However, when you see the burned site, so you see very high. Please note the scale. So this is 20,000 milligram per liter. That means each liter is 20 grams of the solid. It is very high compared to the reference site. So especially in the first flash, although you see this is the discharge, although the precipitation and the discharge is very low, however, it transported a lot of TSS into the downstream. We know that the mercury bind to the TSS in numerous previous studies. So not surprisingly that we saw the mercury transport is in accordance with accordance with the TSS transport, especially in the first rainy season. So the mercury input in the wildfire burn site was up to 17 times higher than the reference watershed. So if you see the levels, so the water in the burned watershed, the highest level is around is almost 1,400 nanogram per liter. So what does this number mean? So give you an idea. In the North Buffalo Creek, the mercury level is 1 nanogram per liter. And in with the water treatment, the mercury level is around 100 nanogram per liter. So this input is kind of 13 times higher than the wastewater treatment plant. It's a very high mercury input. Since TSS is so important for the mercury transport, so I'm curious, what are the sources of TSS mercury? We had a very high TSS, so we are able to collect the TSS on the filter paper and did the analysis. So here we are. This time we use calcium. So now the calcium is useful because we have less mass, amount of samples. So after we analyze the calcium content in the TSS, unburned litter, unburned soil, the ash, the burned soil, we try to include everything on the upland materials. After we analyze the calcium levels, we found that unburned litter, unburned soil, and the burned soil contained relatively lower calcium, while ash contained very high calcium. So this is the maximum calcium level in the other materials other than ash. That means the ash is a very essential contribution to the TSS in the runoff due to the calcium content. So how about mercury? So although ash is a big contribution to the TSS, however, when we look at the mercury, the ash contained relatively lower mercury. However, soils contained more mercury no matter in the unburned soil and burned soil. And the TSS level is here. So it means that TSS is a mixture of ash and soil. So remember the high input of TSS and mercury after the wildfire. So will this consequence last forever? We continue to see the recovery, if it will recover after the first year. So the data you've seen is the first year data, and we continued to collect the second year samples to see the TSS and the mercury. And we found that in the second year, so the 1, 2 means the year number. So in the second year, the TSS reduced significantly in the burned site. And not surprisingly, for mercury, it reduced significantly in the burned site, while in the reference site, no difference at all. So it indicates that very rapid recovery after the first year for the mercury and TSS input. This could be because of the vegetation cover recover. So this is the picture I took in California. I got fortunately I got one award, the Field O'Brien Field Award. Yes, and then it supported me to go to California. And I saw the second year is like this. So the vegetation has already recovered. Also, previous study showing that after the wildfire, usually after 1 year, the vegetation growth will start to recover very well. So the vegetation will kind of hold the materials and reduce the particulate transport and the mercury transport. So in summary, in the burned watershed, mercury transport was highly increased, especially in the first rainy season. And mercury transport in the burned watershed is due to TSS transport. And TSS mercury is demonstrated to be a mixture of mercury from upland ash and soil. And the mercury input declined rapidly in the burned watershed in the second year compared to the first year. So are we done? So the forest fire is there and then we just let it happen? No. So the forest fires, yes, the wildfire is highly intensive, highly temperature and longer duration, and it is not predictable. It caused a lot of damage, no matter to the economy and to the ecosystem. So we have another fire. It's relatively small and low severity and regular, conducted to control wildfires. Usually, for the efficiency, it will be conducted in a 2 to 4 years cycle. So the prescribed fires, there are two kind of prescribed fires. One is pile burn, so they just cut the vegetation, the branches, and restrict a very small area, just burn it, like this picture. And the other is broadcast burning, so someone will go to the forest and try to burn the fuel, try to burn the vegetation and litter and dust to a predetermined area. So it's under control. I'm thinking, so yes, prescribed fire is beneficial to control the wildfire. How is the impact of the prescribed fire on mercury transport? So we got a very unique opportunity for California to do this pile burning study. So in California, usually they don't allow you to do prescribed fire a lot because there are already a lot of fires. We did this experiment in Northern California again. It's a Sitchin experimental forest. The Sitchin Creek is under UC Berkeley field station. So this is how we sampled the samples. Different pile burning events happen in different times. So here is the burning date. So we sampled through the whole year from December 2017 to June 2015. To June 2019. However, we later on we just focus on after the burning, the impacts of the burning. So at different burning events, there are different upstream and downstream. I'll show you in 1 second. For example, in the June 2018 burning, they burned here, they burned 282 and 90, then it will cause S1 as the upstream and then the downstream. So first, look at the hydrological condition in the Sitchin Creek. So Sitchin Creek, it's a snow mountain. So Sitchin Creek is located at Snow Mountain, in which the snow melt is a big proportion to the discharge. As you see that the discharge at the spring is much higher and the winter is much lower. Let's see how it looks like in winter. So it's all snow. And this is the water. And this picture is taken by our collaborator in the winter time. I did not receive samples. They sent a picture saying no sample this week because it's frozen. Yeah. And this is one sample set after the burning. So remember the wildfire burning samples? It's very high TSS. However, you see this very clear. So and we look at the TSS at the Sitchin Creek after the burning event. So the burning event is here and here in brief. So we did not see much difference, no matter the upstream and downstream, although I separated upstream and downstream, but there's no difference. And when we look at it, so no matter in which event, we didn't see significant increase after the pile burnings. That means pile burning could lead to less transport, or it could also because of the high discharge when there's a snow mountain, when there's a snow melt. And when we look at the mercury at Sitchin Creek, you see the symbols from the different colors. We did not see any difference. And same here, not so much difference. So that means no significant increase in mercury after the pile burnings as well. So it seems like the pile burning did not cause much mercury export compared to the wildfire. And so we did the study pile burning here in Northern California. But if you see the prescribed fire map, it's very common in the South U.S. So we are here, and in this area we did a lot of prescribed fires. So why we do prescribed fires in South U.S. Because one way is to control the wildfire to reduce the fuel load. The other, very importantly, is to control the pine beetle attack. So then for the second broadcast burning, the field site is in South Carolina, in this area. So the question is, how is this type of prescribed fire affect the mercury transport? So this is the site information. We have a paired watershed managed by U.S. Forest Service. Watershed 77 is burned it recently burned in March 2018, and watershed 80 is a control site. They have similar vegetation, similar soil, and and similar so the location is very close. So it's a very good control. So the burn severity at 77 in 2018 is no severe burn at all. And 33% of light burn, 66% of moderate burn, and 1% no burn. This is considered as low burn severity in the forest. So we collected the water samples for 2 years from the burn site and the reference site from the weir at the gauging station. And then, so the hydrological condition at these two watersheds. We don't understand why, but the watershed 77 actually had higher discharge than the watershed 80. So this is the picture showing. This is a figure showing the discharge difference between the watershed 77 and the 80. Although they have similar vegetation and other conditions, but according to previous study, the water table at watershed 77 was relatively higher. So we analyzed the TSS again at the two different sites, and we saw a significant difference with a significant elevation at watershed 77 than 80, although not as high as the burn site. But when we look at Mercury, we did not see significant difference between the 77 and 80. So, when we compare the 2 years difference after the burning, in the first year, we saw the significant difference in the TSS, and second year it kind of recovered already. And but for total mercury, no matter in which year, there was no significant difference. That indicates that the broadcast burning did not cause significant increase in mercury export. So, in the first prescribed fire study, we noticed that both prescribed fire types have little impacts on TSS than wildfire in the burned watershed, and the fire does not induce significant changes to the total mercury input after the burning. So this indicates that prescribed fire is less likely to be a concern regarding mercury exported to the downstream environment. This could provide some suggestions to hopefully to the policymakers and the fishery advisories. So what I focused in my study is the upland and runoff. This is but in the downstream, it is a complicated story about mercury transformation and mercury bioaccumulation, including it will affect by the mercury speciation, the abiotic and abiotic factor, including methylation and demethylation, and also the food web structure. Therefore, in the future, I'm very interested to see what's the impacts of the long-term prescribed fires on mercury bioaccumulation in aquatic food web. As you know, prescribed fire is conducted regularly every 2 to 4 years. So how about the long term? And how is the mercury transformations in the downstream environment? Because other than mercury input, there may be some other input, including nutrients and the particularly wood, which could affect the condition of mercury transformation. And the third question, will the burning affect the microbial abundance that functioning in mercury methylation? So thank you for your time and attention. I would be glad to take any questions and comments.
I have a quick question.
Yes.
It's about the sage hen site and pile burning.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't have a clear idea of where they're actually doing the pile burning, say, relative to streams.
Mm-hmm.
Could they simply be in disconnected sites? That's why you're not really getting a whole lot. I think you mentioned the dilution factor of snowmelt.
Mm-hmm.
But what about the positions of the burns?
Yeah, that's a good point. I tried to check with them, and they just say, so in this site, so you see at each unit, they only say, okay, I burned in this unit. It could be, this is the creek. It could be far, I don't know how far is far distance. Yeah, but that's a good point. They only say we conducted pile burning in this site, but they didn't measure, at least I don't have the data of the distance of the pile burning and the stream distance.
Can you get this information?
We were checking.
Okay.
useful.
I was wondering about the same thing exactly, and also wondering when they say pile burning, they just burn one pile, or do they sweep up a bunch of piles in that area and burn them all?
Yes, they cut the vegetations and then have a pile, not only one pile, several piles. They burned within that area. So they kind of they have their own system. They restricted the area, and then the manager, as long as it's within this area, it's fine.
So they're trying, sorry to interrupt, are they trying to kind of get all the deadfall out of that area, but doing it in piles instead of in a, the other kind of prescribed
Yes.
burn? That's the idea.
Yes.
So there might be a lot of piles.
Yes. Yes.
Got a question. So compared to the pile burning versus like wildfire, I assume you compared precipitation between both sides. It's comparable, like not one side is got a lot of water precipitation, like flush out everything. And the other side is like very little water, so it's not too much flush to the downstream system. I assume already on that.
That's a good point. Actually, the hydrological condition in the pile burning and the wildfire site are not the same, although both of them are in Northern California. However, they have some distance. So, and the pile burning site is a snow mountain. It's mainly contributed by the snow melt. So it's different hydrological condition with the wildfire burning site. Yes, Dr. Hassan.
You said that under prescribed fire, the amount of mercury that is released is lower than the wildfire?
You mean?
Or, yeah, so you have the prescribed fire and wildfire.
Yes.
You say the prescribed fire is safer or releases less mercury?
Yes, yes.
Do you know why it happens?
So we are still trying to understand this question, but previous study showing that even the nutrients after the prescribed burning in the Santee experimental forest was not significantly increased. The hypothesis that it could because after the burning there's still a lot of unburned litter and vegetations over there, so it filtered the nutrients to the downstream, and also they also measured the groundwater, and they did not observe the increase in nutrients in groundwater as well. Actually, I also measured the mercury levels in the groundwater, and after the burning, the groundwater contained it's not a big contribution to the stream water as well. So I think it could because the low burn severity that after the burning, there's still first of all, there's still a lot of unburned things that will kind of block the particular transport. The other is the damage on the forest floor is lower than the wildfire. So I think it's caused less erosion to the downstream.
Do you know if it has anything to do with other environmental factors? For example, wind, temperature?
The temperature, you mean the temperature compare the prescribed fire and the wildfire?
Yes, normally if you have like high wind speed, the wildfire become more aggressive, right?
Yeah, so that's a good point. So
to do with mercury transport.
Yeah, wind is another factor, but in the previous study showed that after the burning, actually the overflow runoff is the main contribution other than the wind.
So would you recommend pile burning or other small scale controlled burns based on mercury to the policy maker? Based on the study?
Thank you for this question. I would think if at least for mercury part, I would think the pile burning and no matter pile burning and broadcast burning, they cause the less risk to the mercury export. And of course, they should consider other factors such as the climate in that area, because prescribed fire, if you cannot control it very well, it can be a big fire. And also maybe the geological conditions in that area too.
More questions?
Yes.
So you see that under anoxic condition, the methyl mercury formation is low.
No, actually for mercury methylation, it mainly happens in the anoxic environment. That's why I investigated anoxic environment, how the methylation happens.
So it is more under anoxic condition.
Yes, it
Do
is.
you know why? Does it have anything to do with microorganisms?
Yes, because the microbes that controls mercury methylation, such as sulfate-reducing bacteria, iron-reducing bacteria, all of them are they favor the anoxic environment. That's why.
And in your analysis of the mercury, again, so say when comparing the second and the wildfire, you have information of background mercury content in the soil. Is it just based on geology? It might be.
Yes. So yes, I do have this data. So the Santee experimental forest. For the Satan experimental forest, the mercury content in the ash is much lower. It's less than 10 gram per gram. However, in the soil, it's comparable with the wildfire site. And for the Santee, the soil and the ash is relatively higher than this, but the soil and ash are still comparable with the wildfire site. So the upstream materials mercury content is, I would say it's comparable. So it must be something else. And for the Santee, actually, there is one drawback because I did not analyze the soils from the control site, although I have these samples, but I did not have a chance to analyze them yet. Did I answer your question?
So I guess there's another question from remotely from the Ramji Pandemic. So he's asking about how long do you observe this level of metal mercury in the soil and water after the wildfire is complete?
So all of the three studies are 2 years. Wildfires are 2
How long
years.
was that last?
Yeah, 2 years. And hi, Dr. Panderi. Thank you for your question. So I analyzed the levels of TSS and mercury in the 2 years after the wildfires. And I found the second year was lower, and the main contribution was from the first year, especially in the first rainy season. Did I answer your question?
You can only type comments. More questions? Okay, thank you
Yeah,
very
Dr.
much.
Asena.
And so you say there is high level of mercury in the air, and it enters the plants like through the leaf.
Yes.
Actually through the stomata, right?
Yes.
Do you know the transport mechanism, how it diffuses to the stomata? Is there anything reported on?
This is okay. So This is an interesting question, but actually I'm not very sure the mechanism. I just know it will go into the leaves by stomata uptake, but I'm not sure. I'm not sure if are you asking kind of transporters like that. I'm sorry, I don't know.
This is only a hypothesis, so it would be great if you could take that.
Sure, so thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Anything to be overlooked?
Yes.
There you go.